Are you able to correctly identify key pieces and components of a public key infrastructure? If not, well, good news is we're having that conversation starting right now.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV. It's going to be an interesting episode because we're going to get our hands dirty into some public key infrastructure, setting all that up, learning all the interesting components that go along with that so that we are successful on that Security Plus exam. Wes, I will not hold you back any longer. Let's go ahead and ring the bell and open the gate and let you get to work. What are we going to do?
We're going to talk a little bit about the public key infrastructure. And in a previous episode, we talked about the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. And we learned that asymmetric is also what's known as public key cryptography. Well, now in this episode, we're going to look at the infrastructure that's used in order to issue out our certificates. And there is a hierarchy that we need to be aware of on the exam and some of the concepts. Now, in past episodes, we've definitely shown you some like theoreticals, and we've shown you some PowerPoint slides. So, but what I thought would be interesting in this episode is if we show you how to really just build this public key infrastructure and this hierarchical process that we are talking about, and show you how and demonstrate how that's going to work.
All right, now Wes, you're going to be using a Windows platform to do all this, if I'm not mistaken. But ultimately, it really doesn't matter what platform you're using. At the end of the day, you're issuing certificates, and that's what we want. You just happen to be using a Windows platform. Right?
Most definitely, and I'm glad you mentioned that because not everybody's going to be using Windows in order to set up a public key infrastructure. In fact, let's go ahead and show you what I mean by public key infrastructure a little bit. I'm up on the IT Pro TV website, and you're saying, well, Wes, where's the infrastructure in that? Well, it's kind of hidden here, and maybe you've seen these locks on your browsers before and never even actually dived under the hood to see what's going on here. But if we look, and I choose that little lock, depending on what browser you're using, you can do this a little bit differently, but most of the time you can click on the little lock and you can choose certificate. Now, this is the certificate that's been issued out by the public key infrastructure that's available out there on the internet. This is what we call external certificate authorities. A certificate authority is the computer, if you will, that's responsible for assigning the certificate. And it does work in a hierarchy here. You'll notice that we have the top part of the hierarchy, and that's what's known as a root certificate, and I'm always going to say certification because we're in certification endeavors here. Root certificate authority, right? The root CA is the highest part of the hierarchy, and it's responsible for issuing certificates to lower level CAs. These CAs are also what are known as intermediate or subordinate CAs. Now, Dan, question here. We call these root certificate authorities. We also call them CAs. There we go. We also call these offline CAs. Have you ever heard of that term before?
Yeah, it was interesting. I hadn't really heard that basic terminology before, but what you were telling me about it before is really fascinating, and how it's basically a type of protection.
It really is, because if you think about it, if this is the top part of the hierarchy and we're issuing out certificates and this top part of the hierarchy gets exploited, guess what? Every certificate that this root CA, and there could be thousands, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of certificates that this root CA has issued that now have to be revoked, which means made invalidate the certificate. So they're also called offline CAs because they're so important to the hierarchy. Typically what you'll do is the root CA will only issue certificates to the intermediate CAs, and then you'll take that root CA offline completely. Right, not even air-gapped, like maybe even taking the storage device, the hard drive, out and locking it in a safe, and you keep it protected. The intermediate CAs, subordinate to the root, are ones that eventually, essentially what they are going to do is they're going to issue the certificates to all entities out there, right? They're really the workhorses of the public key infrastructure. And you can see that they've issued, from an intermediate CA, they've issued a certificate to myself, or to IT Pro TV here as an entity, and we can validate that. When you come to this website, I should say, you can validate that IT Pro TV is who they say they are because these external authorities have issued these certificates. What we're going to do is we're going to show you how to set up an internal PKI, and this is one that we're going to manage and is really only going to be trusted. It's a trust model, essentially, but it's only going to be trusted by the computers inside of our organization. And that's the difference between an external CA and an internal CA.
I would think that we are doing this for the purposes of the idea that, well, we can control it. That
That's right.
Seems like a really good idea.
That's right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, probably price.
Absolutely, yeah. When you have somebody else manage your CA or your certificates externally, you're talking about a lot of money. So a lot of times what you're going to do is you're going to maybe create your internal CA, your internal PKI, and then you'll be responsible for your certificates within your organizations. And anything that's facing the public that's going to touch a public network essentially is going to be an external CA, and they usually back their certificates with lots of moolah. So let's go ahead and let's kind of dive right in here. So that gives you a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to try to build this public key infrastructure, and we're going to create a root and an intermediate CA, and then we're going to go ahead and see if we can't issue out a certificate to a user here. So let's dive right in. I got 3 computers here. I got a domain controller that's silently running in the background, and I got 2 member servers here. Our member server, the first one here, this is going to be our root CA, and what we're going to do is we're going to go up in Server Manager. We're going to go to the Manage option, and we're going to choose Add Roles and Features. Now, from here, we're going to add the role that we want. In this case, this is going to be a role-based or feature-based installation, so we'll choose Next in the wizard. And we'll select, this is our only server from this pool, and we'll choose Next. And in Active Directory, their public key infrastructure is Active Directory Certificate Services. And when we choose to add this, it's going to add some other additional features like the RSAT Remote Server Administration Toolkit, and then you could potentially see things like IIS get involved in here as well. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add this, this role here, and it's going to ask us if we want to do any other services. We're not going to do any other services, but this is an online responder. This is the way Microsoft implements something known as the OCSP. That's the Online Certificate Status Protocol. We're going to talk about something known as a certificate revocation list. These CAs maintain certificates that they've invalidated, whether it's for, cease of operations, if it's been compromised. They will be put into what's known as a certificate revocation list. So if the certificate is passed to you, first thing you're going to do is make sure it's valid. Then you're also going to make sure that it hasn't been revoked, and you'll check the CA to ensure that it hasn't been revoked.
So no cert reuse then.
That's right.
Once it gets that revocation list, it's done like
That's it. That you can never reissue that same certificate. And you would have to check all of the revoked certificates in that list. So this is a way to speed up the process. There's something known. Microsoft implements it as an online responder. OCSP, or the Online Certificate Status Protocol, says, I don't want to check the entire CRL. I'm going to hand you a serial number, the identifier on the certificate, and tell me if that certificate is valid or not. It's just a way to speed up the process. NDES, the Network Device Enrollment Services, that's their way of implementing something known as the Simple Device Enrollment Protocol. We're not going to worry about any of those, but the OCSP and the CRL, or the CRL, is something you need to be aware of. Now, that gets this started here. Let's go ahead and let's keep this ball moving, because we've got to install it on the other computer as well, even before we get it configured. So we're going to let this one go ahead and install, and that is our CA. That's going to be the top part of that root, that hierarchy that we said. Next thing we'll do is we're going to just follow wash, rinse, and repeat, and we're going to do add and remove roles here as well on this side. And again, it's just Next. This is a role-based or feature-based installation. We're going to go ahead and choose this server from the pool, and we'll choose Active Directory Certificate Services. We'll add all the necessary features. We're just kind of going next through this list. Again, same thing as before. We're just going to create the certificate authority here. This is going to be our subordinate CA. So we're going to let this go through the installation process. And I hope if by the time we switch back over, not quite done. A little bit impatient. Faster computers get, the more impatient I get. So we'll just wait temporarily. This shouldn't take too long. And then what we can do from here is we can, there we go. And we can walk through this process. All right, so now the next thing that we have to do is we actually have to start configuring the Active Directory Certificate Services. And there are some concepts in here that I want to kind of explain. And I figured it'd be good to show you what these look like rather than just showing you a bunch of terms and definitions. I will tell you, I will put the terms and definitions in the learner resources so that you can go back through them as a vocabulary list. But until then, we'll just kind of explain this as we walk through the installation process. So choosing Next here, remember we're on our root CA. This is going to be our root certificate authority. We'll choose the CA setup. Now, the next thing here, this is specific to Windows. Dan mentioned, and I'm glad he did when we started here, hey, this is a Windows PKI specific installation. Yep, this is a Windows specific functionality here. Enterprise CAs just mean they integrate with Active Directory. Standalone means it stands alone outside of your Active Directory. Almost sounds like a Godsmack song. I stand alone. We'll choose next here. All right. And what it's going to do now, and here, Dan, here's what we were talking about. Notice that we says the root CA versus the subordinate CA. Now, the root CA there, that's the highest part of the hierarchy. And if we already had this in existence, which you'll see when we do the sub, we could choose the subordinate CA.
So, Wes, after we create our subordinate CA and get everything set up, are we going to then snatch the hard drive out of this
I'm going to kill this thing.
And, yeah, put it
not really. I won't kill it, but I'll definitely kill the power to it for sure. We'll pull the hard drive out and put it in a safe.
Get some armed guards.
That's right. So we'll go ahead and choose next here, and then it's going to ask us what key do we want to use. Remember, we talked about asymmetric encryption in the previous episode, right? This is going to associate itself with a public key and a private key. We're essentially creating a new private key. Now, when we create the new private key, I will tell you these are various sources of what are known as cryptographic service providers. It just means what kind of algorithm are you going to use to generate your keys, all right? The keys are actually doing the work. The algorithm is just how it happens, all right? So we're just going to leave it at the basics here.
You've got quite a few of them there, though. And
we do.
You also have some hashing algorithms I saw as well, but I would assume that we want to go with the most robust solution.
Yes.
For this, the most strong. But there are some pros and cons for going stronger versus weaker.
Most definitely. So and I'm glad you said that. So the stronger the key, right? And let me show you this. Typically, root CAs, the key links are going to be larger than what the subordinates are. All right. So notice I have a 4096. I have options here. I could use a weaker key, longer key, stronger key. Harder to encrypt because it takes a lot more CPU processing power. So it could slow things down, but it's also harder to break. Shorter key length, that means not as weak, all right, not as strong, a little bit weaker, but it does allow for a better processing speed. So you got to kind of weigh the pros and cons of each. All right, so we're going to go ahead. We'll choose 4096. We'll choose next to this. And now here's the next thing is the common name. A common name is important. It's typically a host name and the domain name. Now, I could change this. I'm just going to leave this to the defaults, but be aware of what a common name is. It's part of what's known as the X.509 or certificate-based standard out there. If you want to read into it, I would encourage you for the exam. Then we're going to choose next. Now we're going to set the validity period. We don't want all of our certificates expiring at the same time because then we got a lot of work to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our root CA's validity period before the certificate needs to be renewed or invalidated, revoked. We're going to make it a 10-year validity period. And we'll choose next. We'll leave the database where it's supposed to be, and we'll choose configure. All right. Now, that is really one of the first things that we have to do to get the root set up. All right. Now, let's remember where we are. What we just did here in our hierarchy is we essentially set up the highest portion. Now, this isn't Amazon's. This is an internal CA, not an external CA. These are external. But we essentially set up the top part of this hierarchy. Now, from here, what we're going to do is we're going to switch back over to the second server, and we're going to create the root CA, or the subordinate CA, excuse me. Now, when we do the subordinate CA, interestingly enough, because this is integrated with Active Directory, as I start this wizard kick this wizard off to configure it, I want you to notice I'll select certification authority, just like we did on the other root CA. We're going to do an enterprise level CA with this as well. We want it integrated with Active Directory. Let me close that and choose next. But notice now, by default, since it's integrated, it's aware of the root. It says, oh, you got a root CA. You want me to become a subordinate? And we're going to say yes to that. We're going to choose yes to the subordinate CA. Now, the subordinate CA also needs their own key, because remember, they're going to endorse the certificates with this key that they issue to everybody else, the second part of that hierarchy. We're going to go ahead and choose next. We're going to leave the cryptographic service provider and its key length the way it is, because it's half the key length, the bit length of the root. And I'm going to keep the common name the same for this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to save this to what's known as a certificate request. You have what's known as a CSR. That's a certificate signing request. And this one just happens to be what's known as a PEM, Privacy Enhanced Mail format, which means it is a base 64 ASCII encoded. All right, a lot of technical jargon for it says begin certificate, end certificate. You could see it, that human readable information.
Literally says
begin certificate. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what's known as a certificate signing request. If I want to request a certificate, even if I'm a subordinate, I need to submit a signing request that's then issued over to whoever the certificate authority is. They read it, and depending on whatever the policy is, they issue it out.
And speaking of security, keep these secure, because if someone gets a hold of them, well, guess what?
That's absolutely right. Remember, your cryptology is only good. Cryptography is only as good as the keys that you keep secure. If they're not secure, the whole thing's ruined.
Private keys stay private.
That's right. So we'll go ahead and choose next, and we'll choose next on this, and then configure one more time. And I want you to notice something. Notice that it errors out right away. It says, all right, now Active Directory Services installation is incomplete. Well, that's because our root CA doesn't know anything about this CA yet. So what we need to do is we need that root CA to issue a certificate. Let's go ahead and show you how we accomplish the second part in the hierarchy here. So I'm going to switch back over to our root CA. We'll go ahead and close this. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fire up our certificate authority console, and you can see here's our root. All right, and if I expand this out, I'm going to right-click real quick and choose Properties. All right, and hopefully that'll show up pretty quick. Sometimes when it looks at its own certificates, it says, yeah, it'll just take a while to do that. All right, but we're going to go ahead and, oh, there's our certificate. And if we view the root certificate and view the information, there's what's known as a certificate path in here, certification path. And what that's going to say is, where's that hierarchy? How do I know where this is endorsed? Well, it's endorsed by the root. That's what's known as a self-signed certificate. It says, I'm endorsing you because I'm endorsing you. So that's the first part of the hierarchy. But now we need to issue the certificate to the subordinate. So to do that, we're going to go to the certificate authority console here. We're going to right-click, actually select the server, excuse me. Right-click, and you'll see there's all tasks. And notice it says submit a new request. Now it's going to ask us where the request is. Now I saved that request on the administrative share of the other server. So that's going to be MBR SRV2 \C$. And when I hit that, you're going to notice that here's that request. And in fact, if I open this real quick, let's see if we can just kind of show this to you, not Internet Explorer. All right, notice that, like Dan was saying, literally, it says begin new request. This is that base 64 encoded text that is going to be used for the certificate signing request. We're going to go ahead and choose open. And let me refresh that. And then hopefully... Yep, there we go. It's taking a little bit. It's asking me, where do I want to save the certificate? So it's already processed it, and there's a certificate. So I'm going to go ahead, and we'll call this the Sec Plus Sub CA Cert. And we'll talk about these certificate types coming up in another episode. So there's my certificate. It's been issued. Now, let's go ahead and complete the second part of that chain, all right? Let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to open up our certification. That's why I always go back and forth between certificate and certification. Notice that it says, hey, that's not started. It's because we haven't imported that certificate. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to right-click on our subordinate CA and choose Start the Service, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to install this certificate? We're going to say yes. And it's going to ask me, where is that certificate? And if you remember, we saved it on our local disk C here, and we're going to change the format to, all files. And there's our cert for the sub CA, and we're going to import that. And it should tell me as well that, hey, you don't trust the root certificate certification authority either, right? Because we just stood this up. This computer doesn't know about the root yet. So it's saying, hey, do you want to install this and trust the root certificate? And we're going to say yes. All right. It's going to go ahead and it's going to install that. And hopefully what we're going to see here, I say hopefully what we'll see here
There's
is...
always a little bit of finger crossing.
There is.
So be prepared for that.
Absolutely, there is. So here we have, if we now see we have a certificate authority, and if I right-click on it and choose Properties, here's the sub-CA's certificate. And hopefully this won't take too long to kind of generate, and we'll see what it looks like. And last but not least, Dan, I know we're running a little bit short on time. I still wanted to kind of show the last part of that certification path. Notice here we got our certificate, the second part of the certificate path. At this point, it would just be the process of issuing a certificate to the user. So let me go ahead and see. I believe I've got a user in Active Directory that we could try to issue a certificate real quick, and then we could show you the last part of the chain there. Like I said, I believe that a demonstration like this actually kind of shows you how you're bringing this process up and what the components are that we're using in order to accomplish that. So it's building my desktop.
I do like the idea of kind of giving some context behind. It's wonderful to understand, oh, it's a certificate, and it kind of verifies I am who I say I am. Great, but you're giving it some legs. You're kind of showing us that process of how it even becomes a thing that we get in our hands and then start to use in many and variety of different ways.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. And one of the use cases we're going to see here is completing that part, the last part of that hierarchy is we're going to issue a certificate to an end user, or more rightfully so, I guess the order of operations is me as a user, I'm going to request a certificate, and we hope that the certificate authority actually issues that certificate to me. So I'm going to go ahead and I've opened a Microsoft Management Console, and I'm hitting Control-M, and we're going to load the certificate console up. And this shows the local certificate store, all the certificates that this user has stored for their account. And if we select personal here, you're going to notice that it says, well, there's no items to view. And that's because we haven't requested a certificate yet. So we're going to generate a certificate signing request. This is actually going to happen underneath. We've kind of already showed you what happens with a CSR. This is going to happen for us on our behalf. So we're going to request a new certificate, and we're going to choose next. And it's going to reach out to Active Directory, and it's going to say, hey, what are the certificates that you have, CA, that you have available that I could potentially enroll for? And we're hoping what we're going to see here is that we have, well, administrator, EFS, if we're doing EFS encryption. If we're doing key management, we need to be the recovery agent. We could be an EFS recovery agent, but we're just going to choose user. And I'm going to select the details here. And notice that it can be used for digital signatures, EFS, SMIME, client authentication. But I'm going to choose properties here because remember, we didn't take our root offline like we normally would. So I'm going to act like the root's offline. So it's not even going to be out there to listen for requests and issue certificates. And we're going to choose OK to this, and then we're going to choose enroll. And now what it's going to do is it's going to generate that certificate signing request. We won't see it, and it's going to hand it over to a CA. If we wanted to protect the CA, we could add another thing called a registration authority, and it would just receive certificate requests on our behalf, and it would point it over to the CA and request it, kind of like a proxy. That's what a registration authority is. But in this case, what we're doing, and you can see we've reached out directly. We don't have a registration authority. Reached out directly to the CA. We're going to choose finish, and now we have a certificate object or folder, if you will, here. And you can see that there is a certificate that's issued to my account. And if I choose open, we can see what this can be used for. We can see the details and the attributes of the certificate, including where the certificate revocation list is. We can see when it expires. You can see the thumbprint, all this good information, and more than anything, we can see that we've created that PKI, that public key infrastructure. Starting, we showed you how to create the root, the intermediate, and then finally assigning a certificate via our issuing certificate to an entity, that entity being me.
Well, Wes, that was a lot of moving parts, but we really appreciate you walking us through this PKI business and kind of giving us an under the hood look of that infrastructure and looking at those moving parts in a little more detail than we would by just hearing a definition. That's much appreciated. That being said, we are out of time for this episode, but guess what? There's more to come in Security Plus, so join us then. Until then, have yourself a great day.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.